The soul or star seed is called the indestructible drop in the Tibetan tradition. In the East, the soul drop is called the seed atom. It's the nucleus. It's the adamantine particle. It's the fundamental aspect of it. And it's important for us to acknowledge this because something that is happening in our world that leaves some in a blur is there is a movement to redefine what our soul is. There's the technological view is that the idea of a soul is something that's given to us by God, created by God, and is this ethereal aspect. They think of that, technologists think of that as somehow being archaic, folklore, superstition. And they're, in a sense, in a very real sense, redefining the definition of the word soul. So the technologists, what I've observed is that your soul is nothing but the information you put up on Facebook. All those photos, all those posts you put on Facebook and Instagram, that information, that data, that is the new version of the soul. And this is what we're at risk of losing if a generation grows up thinking it's all ones and zeros and they're just data. They're being told that they're just matter, and really they don't. And this is why it's so important for Ascension, Starseed, Starwalker teachings to be out in the public mind right now so that we have this deep reminder of who we truly are at this time. This starseed is conscious. It's that conscious entity that, according to the Gnostic tradition, came from elsewhere and literally manifests our physical body as a vehicle for incarnation. It's a vehicle for entertainment, it's a vehicle for working out karma, but it's this inner nucleus within you that has the ability to manifest the physical body and is partly used to embrace these cosmic teachings. In Hinduism and Buddhism, the lotus is associated with the birth of the divine beings. And of course, the lotus bud or blossom then becomes the symbol for enlightenment. This is why we have the 7 chakras within us, the 7 wheels that are symbolized by the lotus. As we awaken the chakras, we ultimately awaken the 1,000-petaled lotus, as it's referred to in Tibetan Buddhism. And we are referencing the gold jewel that we see in the third eye of the Buddha here. That stone that belongs in that statue is a symbol of our foundation stone, the connecting link that we all have with the divine realms. And of course, what I'm ultimately speaking about is the awakening of the pineal gland and its ability to produce various hormones and secretions that can transmute the body, that can connect us to higher realms. And once we unfold this lotus blossom within us, now we're embracing more of a cosmic consciousness. And this is why the ancients used the lotus to symbolize the Milky Way galaxy itself. Just 100 years ago, 2 things were true. One was we looked out into the night sky and we thought that the stars that we saw were all that there was. Then Edwin Hubble came along. He had taken a photograph of a smudge of light as he's peering out into the Milky Way galaxy, and he has a sense that that smudge of light is actually not a nebula, it's another galaxy. And with Hubble's discovery, as he sharpened his photography, he discovered that there's not just one galaxy in the universe, there's 2. Okay? That was just 100 years ago. Okay? We thought there were 2 galaxies. Now we know there's hundreds of billions of galaxies, all with trillions of stars in them, and that's just the known universe. We're not even talking about the multiverse theory here. So think how far we've come in just 100 years. The other thing that was true back then is that the British Navy was the most powerful force on the planet. And of course, the British Navy then was replaced by the United States Air Force and advanced technology, and this is where we are today. In not an arms race any longer, but we are in an AI race. And we are the ones that are now walking between the worlds, trying to embrace the cosmos, embrace our enlightenment. At the same time, we're being challenged by a very, in some people's opinion, dark force on the planet, and that being AI. So how do we walk between these worlds? You and I are now looking into the night sky and knowing that we are connected with these other worlds. At the same time, we're walking through a different phase in our earthly walk. And becoming attuned to the Starwalker consciousness, if you will, I think is going to be a huge part of the healing and the answer that we need to successfully navigate these times. So as we meditate on these images, we see the images of the 2 galaxies beside a lily pond, and we know that through the as above, so below adage that now we are in part walking into the stars. More and more discoveries are being made every day. We live in a time of disclosure as well. Imminently, perhaps in the next few years, according to the experts, we're being told we will have definitive evidence of extraterrestrial civilizations. Many of us already have enough evidence to know that that is so, but we're all waiting for that moment when we have the direct evidence from a governmental authority that says, yeah, UFOs are real. That changes everything. Because now we're asking, well, who are these beings? What is our relationship to them? And what does that do for our fundamental human heritage? And what is our role that we're all going to be playing here in the next several years? It's vital that all of us are engaged in the decision-making of what is going to be the next iteration of humanity. Will we evolve into a more spiritual species, or will we evolve into a more transhuman species? You and I are the ones that are making that decision for all of human history henceforth. And that's a tremendous responsibility. And we didn't talk about this before 10 years ago. In this environment, in this conference. Now we are. We're fully addressing it, and I fully expect that next year it'll be an even larger topic. And so what has to happen, in my view, is in order to transcend these challenges, as I said in my book, The Singularity is Near, the antidote to artificial intelligence is to tap our Ascension intelligence, to begin to think like the angels, to think like the Starwalkers, to do the same things that they do. And what we want to start to figure out is, what is that consciousness? What is that angelic consciousness, that ascended consciousness, or if you prefer, the Starwalker consciousness? In my view, to track that consciousness, we go back to the ancient world. When the otherworldly beings, the Starwalkers, came here, they left a trail for us. Very often that trail is focused on the Milky Way galaxy herself. So if we see the arc or bend of the Milky Way, we happen to be out in a desert scene and we see this magnificent scene, we know that this is what the Egyptians were showing us in their depictions of the goddess Nut, with her arcing body that is usually filled with stars. She is the Milky Way. She's the great river of life, the winding waterway upon which the celestial beings would ride their ship of Isis, or the arc of the millions of years, and traverse the cosmos and come to Earth. We can even think of the Great Pyramid complex in Giza as their mooring post. It certainly is a transfiguration machine, according to the ancient Egyptians. But when we start to travel around the world, be it in Cappadocia, in Turkey, or Easter Island, or here in Peru, Ladakh, all around the world we find a common connection among these cultures, and that is a belief in beings who walked into this world, and the ability of humans to also go to these sacred sites, connect with the Milky Way, and become Starwalkers ourselves. That is what is ultimately embedded in all of these traditions. If I were to just jump out on a long limb right here and say, well, who are these Starwalkers? What are we actually talking about? I'll give you one example before we continue. Think of it this way. Think of some priestesses on the Pleiades star system nearby, the Seven Sisters. And think of them being specially trained to visit various star systems, planetary systems, to incarnate on a planet and introduce the star-walking teaching. How do they get here? That's the ultimate question that we always have when we're talking about extraterrestrials. What I research is a group of priestesses that had an ability to dissolve their body into its light essence. We call it the rainbow light body in the Tibetan tradition. We call it the star body, or other such terms. They can dissolve their body into its essence. They can beam their consciousness, sometimes literally on beams of light, to other worlds, including Earth, when they then phase back into their physical flesh and blood body. Lately, I've been following the work of Dr. Marguerite Riglioso, who studies parthenogenesis from a scholarly perspective. Our work is starting to dovetail in a really beautiful way, because she shows how this very same group of priestesses then had the ability to divinely conceive versions of themselves, clones of themselves, without assistance of males. So they create a clone, a goddess clone of themselves, and now they're ready to start going out and performing their mission here on Earth. They even go so far as to tell us how Figures such as Pythagoras, Alexander the Great, even Jesus, of course, were divinely conceived this way by a lineage of priestesses that originated in the Pleiades. This is the essence of the Starwalker tradition, because when we think about traveling the stars, we're often thinking about jumping in one of Elon Musk rocket ships, right? And putting our way off the Earth and going out to Mars if we're lucky. But in the priestess tradition, there's no rocket ship involved. It's the body itself then becomes the vehicle for their ability to travel through the stars. Can you think of a more beautiful or elegant way of traveling the stars? And who else would like to do that besides me, right? This is the idea that is enfolded within the Starwalker tradition, that we have this level of being. So we're obviously gone way beyond traditional views of like the Anunnaki and them traveling in generation starships and these sorts of ideas. And this is what I think is most important for us to start to look at, especially today. This is Durdledore in England, Stonehenge. All of these sites around the world are trying to get us to remember something ultimately about ourselves and our ability to walk through the stars. This really came home for me when on Ancient Aliens we did an episode about Stonehenge. We had talked about Stonehenge in so many episodes, but we decided that we would do a dedicated episode about Stonehenge. And we started out with a piece of research from Harvard University Medical School, where they did the world's largest genetic study. And they set out to prove what everybody already knew essentially was true. That is that the builders of Stonehenge are the original descendants of the English people. And what this Harvard study showed was that that's not true. That in fact, when the ancestors of today's English people came to England, the island was empty. So they studied Stonehenge more closely, and from some of the remains that they discovered and the pottery shards and so forth, they determined that the builders of Stonehenge came from very near Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. They came up to Stonehenge, and within 200 years of building Stonehenge, they vanished. They are not anywhere to be found in the British Isles. They're not in England, they're not in Scotland, they're not in Ireland, leaving the archaeologists completely befuddled. This was a bombshell in the archaeological community. What do you mean they're not there? And our position on Ancient Aliens was, well, haven't you ever read any of the legends about Stonehenge? It's a portal. And is this showing us that this was a group of people who perhaps survived the great cataclysm of 10,000 BC and brought this knowledge up to Stonehenge and used it? This is part of the Starwalker tradition that we're talking about. They knew how to walk the road of stars, the Milky Way, the path of souls. This is something that it's referenced as in the Native American tradition, all throughout North America. The tribes speak of this ability of all of us to connect with star beings, to have contact with star brothers, star sisters, and that their purpose in coming is ultimately to show us how to walk the road of stars, how to walk the path of souls. And it's very interesting that as these teachings were pieced together in the early 20th century by anthropologists from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, they told a story that's remarkably similar to what the ancient Egyptians would say, that the Milky Way is the path of souls, it's the road of stars, that once we make our transition, that we want to head for the 3 belt stars of Orion, hang a left, cross over the bridge, watch out for the fox, watch out for the wolf, head for the center of the Milky Way galaxy. And they spent their lives rehearsing this journey over and over again, making it a concrete fact in their imagination, so that then at the time of their transition, they knew where to go and what to do. And this is something that is, I think, very important for us to be thinking about today. As I like to say, we have holiday plans, we have career plans, we have retirement plans. What is your ascension plan, right? Where did you come from before you were in one of these bodies? What are you doing here? And when it's time for you to go, where are you going and how are you going to get there? And how much time on a typical day do you spend thinking about that, right? it's kind of the point that we spend our lives so focused on other areas, but really what we want to be thinking about is how are we going to connect with all that is? And where is our journey taking us, and how are we going to be able to fulfill it? Some people have a deep religious faith that it's all going to be taken care of. It's at some point that it'll just be a natural thing, and perhaps it is. But perhaps we can also not accelerate that, but we can accentuate that experience by delving into some of the topics that we're talking about today. We are all Starwalkers on this path of souls, and we're all somewhere along that path, and we're all here to help each other along that path, to share our knowledge, and to ultimately show others how to connect with the Milky Way. This pillar of the Milky Way that we're looking at in this image here, this beautiful composite image, is the ladder. It is the stairway. It's the tree of life of all the spiritual traditions. I'm convinced it's the enlightenment tree that the Buddha is meditating under. And because in the Buddhist tradition, they teach that from incarnation to incarnation, the soul grows the physical body to absorb these teachings. And that if the Dalai Lama were here, for example, he would be telling us that we spend incarnation after incarnation, maybe many hundreds of them, trying to get to this place where we can return to the place our souls came from, that we can understand the process of awakening, the process of ascension, and actually consciously go about affecting that while we're on earth. And what I'm suggesting to you is when we're looking at this tree, this is the tree of souls. It's the tree of life. It's the tree of all the interconnected galaxies, all the billions of them. And we have the capability of remembering the light being in the portal within us at the center of our being and connecting with the Starwalkers who have effected this transformation before us. So I want to talk just briefly about my logo. I call him the Starwalker, and the origins of this idea, because it has enfolded within it a real key piece of what I'm trying to offer you today and asking you to take on board your own journey. So it's about a little over a year ago. I'm in a deep journey, the kind that opens your heart with the DMT flooding in my consciousness, and suddenly a shimmering veil opens. And now I'm in an Egyptian temple. And it's not unlike the Egyptian temples I know so well from 26 visits to Egypt. I know that I'm in something like the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, but it's so much more magnificent than any experience I've ever had on Earth. And I'm looking around and I see this giant throne. I mean, it's 10, maybe 12 feet tall. And I'm like really locked onto it because I've studied these thrones for the past 20 years. And I've always seen them as feathered, and they're feathered thrones because they ascend, but this one's full of stars. And it's blowing me away. It's like, wait, I've never thought about these thrones as being filled with stars, but this makes perfect sense that we're on an ascension throne here, so of course it's filled with stars. A moment later, I see a sort of gently undulating mermaid's tail sitting on the throne. And I think she's just kind of calming me, really. Her tail looks like it's a peacock tail. It's iridescent and it's shimmering. And then she speaks to me and she says, William, your work with the ship of eternity, the boats of the millions of years in Egypt is beautiful. And I'm like, wow, thank you. I'm talking to a mermaid here, and she knows about my work with the ship of eternity. And she says, yeah, no, really, it's beautiful. And then she says, you know that image on the sarcophagus in the Cairo Museum you've been trying to get all these years? I said, yeah. How do you know about that, right? She says, that's you. And I said, yeah, I know. I identify with that figure. I get that. And she says, no, that's you. And at that moment, I knew it was almost like receiving a download. It's like, okay, this is where it's all going to go from here. I've got to really lock onto and help to share this idea with people about the Starwalkers. So here is the entranceway, what used to be the entranceway to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Most everything you see here has now been removed. It's been taken over to the Grand Egyptian Museum. near the pyramids in anticipation of this magnificent museum opening. So when you used to walk into the Cairo Museum, it was kind of just this bewildering array of different objects, all these masterpieces. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. And here in the center is a sarcophagus. And it's on this sarcophagus that this mermaid is directing me, and we're talking about this image. And over the years, I've tried to capture various angles and images of this, because it's just like a force of attraction between me and this thing. It's just one of those things, and I know you have things in your life that have gotten you that way, so you can relate. It was made originally for Meron Ptah, who is the son of Ramses II. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this family, but they're an extraordinary family that knew the secrets of starwalking. The patriarch of the family is King Seti I. He's one of 4 acknowledged humans, mortals, who ascended in the ancient Egyptian tradition. And his family then, led by his son Ramses II, went all around Egypt encoding their starwalking secrets in the temples. And this Meron Ptah is the grandson of King Seti. So his brother, by the way, is Khemweset. He made a very important site called the Serapeum near Saqqara, which is a highly, highly enigmatic place. But this family knew the secrets of starwalking. And in fact, in his tomb, Meron Ptah is shown here with Ra. He's got his magic resurrection stick in his hand, which is being held both by Ra and also by Meron Ptah. And as we look into the image here, we see that he's inhaling something from the key of life that tips this magic stick, this resurrection stick. What tips that stick is oil, a sacred oil that was hallucinogenic or psychoactive. So that when Meron Ptah or any other figure has that key of life in their nose, we know they're inhaling it, and whatever oil is on the tip of that key of life is breaking the blood-brain barrier and now opening up their consciousness. Probably Meron Ptah would have dimethyltryptamine and other hormones that are now being secreted throughout his consciousness and awakening him to these other worlds. And this is a real key to the ancient Egyptian starwalking tradition. So again, as I said, I spent all these years trying to do a contortionist act to get underneath this sarcophagus, to get up and in so that I can take the picture that I wanted to take. In the sarcophagus, we see the goddess Nut. Her body's filled with stars. She's the Milky Way, once again. That's why her body's filled with stars. And what we see are these boats, the Ark of the Millions of Years or Ship of Eternity, sailing upon her body. And here finally in the last slide here is our Starwalker on the Ship of Eternity, holding the magic stick, the resurrection stick. It's a combined Uaz, Ankh, and Jed, and then drawing down the power of the stars. And this is what I got at that moment, is that this is what we, I think, need at this time. This is what I need to be presenting to people anyway, is the concepts that are enfolded within here. The Ark of the Millions of Years is such a highly provocative symbol, and I had been working with it since the late 90s when I first looked at this image of Orion or Osiris in the ceiling of the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, and made the realization that the way the ancient Egyptians portrayed the Ark of the Millions of Years precisely matches the way modern science portrays a wormhole. That was laughable to Egyptologists back then, but now we're understanding the consciousness that is enfolded here, that what if the ancient Egyptian gods, in fact, were starwalkers? They did travel through wormholes, what we today think of as wormholes and stargates. And here's the evidence of it on the temple wall. There's a whole consciousness that's enfolded within here, focused on the idea of, especially of manifestation and of journeying between worlds. Osiris or Orion is portrayed walking upon his wormhole or star walking. And what we see at the end of the Ark of the Millions of Years are these lotus-shaped gateways. Okay? The lotus in the ancient Egyptian tradition, just like the Tibetan tradition, represents manifestation. Throughout the Tibetan tradition, we learn stories of rainbow light body beings and lamas that have the ability to manifest out of thin air. They are always portrayed emerging from a lotus blossom. The lotus now becomes not just a symbol of our illuminated consciousness in the Milky Way, but also it represents wormhole and stargate travel, the ability to project ourselves into other realms and to manifest through portals and gateways. And this is a representative of a massive elevation of our consciousness in our world. We've only in the past 50 years really been talking about the science of wormholes, and now we're creating simulated wormholes on quantum computers. The Google Sycamore computer, for example, has created a simulated wormhole in a quantum computer. This is becoming a reality, and perhaps this is going to be the next step for humanity, and I believe it is. After the internet, what's next? Teleportation. Wormhole travel, connecting with other beings from other worlds. But in my view, the U shape of the wormhole-shaped boat, the Ark of the Millions of Years, I think of that as the uber symbol out of which all esoteric and sacred symbols emerge, because it represents our path of life. We all experienced an inhuman past. We all came from somewhere else before we came to Earth in this manifestation. We're all experiencing a life, which is a gift or a present. We're going through the the throat of the wormhole. We will all ultimately experience a resurrection in a future. It may be on this plane, it may be in some other world altogether, and probably will be. And this is what we find enfolded within the ancient Egyptian star-walking tradition, is this recognition of the continuum that we all live within. And another example of the favorite Starwalker image is this one, also from the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, where we see the wormhole-shaped Ark of the Millions of Years. We see the Pharaoh, a Ptolemaic king, a mortal human who has transfigured into light and is now traveling aboard the Ark of the Millions of Years. He has his crown of wisdom. He has his resurrection stick. He has the key of life in his hand. He is riding upon the Ark of the Millions of Years, and he's sitting on his feathered Ascension throne. These are all representative of aspects of our consciousness. They may be actual tools, although I've never found a 3D resurrection stick in Egypt. It could exist, but they're aspects of ourselves. We're to recognize that we embody this resurrection stick. That's our spinal cord system. We have the crown of wisdom already within us. For most people, it's just turned off. We haven't decided to awaken, but once we do, now we've got the crown of wisdom. The key of life is just that. In Tibet, they call it the Vajra, which symbolizes compassion in action. So the idea is that these are aspects of our consciousness. These are tools that we can all pick up. The key of life is compassion in action. We all can learn the positive thinking and manifestation techniques that will enable us to fold space-time. An example of this that we find in the Tibetan tradition is Padmasambhava, one of the rainbow light body gurus who manifested through a lotus as an 8-year-old child when he originally came to Earth. And in Tibetan rainbow light body traditions in the Tankas, they show him sitting on his lotus throne. They show him with the resurrection stick or staff. He's got his crown of glory. He's got the Vajra in his hand, which is a lightning bolt symbolizing plasma, perhaps even the form that he originally inhabited before he came to Earth, or most certainly compassion in action. Golden rays radiating from within his body, and ultimately a very beautiful stargate symbolism on the rim of the image, indicating that once he dissolves his body into light, he travels the stars through wormholes. It's identical to what we saw in Egypt. And what this tells us is that this teaching is not Egyptian, it's not Tibetan, it belongs to no one particular religious or spiritual tradition. It's the original cosmic teaching, the original cosmic spiritual teaching brought here by the Starwalkers. And as we start to connect the dots between these various traditions, what we're really doing is reassembling that original teaching. Now, we should know that according to the Tibetans, this teaching that we're referencing at this moment is taught in 13 star systems, including our own, with beings coming and going constantly from and to these star systems. And you and I have the ability to make contact with those beings and indeed follow them in their journey if we choose to. The list that I've developed over the years includes Sol, which is the name of our star system, Sirius, Orion, the Pleiades, Cygnus, Lyra, Vega, Arcturus, Ursa Major. That's 9. The Tibetans are telling us that there's 4 more, at least, that are in this sort of federation of star systems, if you will, where this teaching is taught, once again, with beings coming and going. And it's up to us to not be like the 2 caterpillars I saw once looking up at a butterfly saying, "You'll never get me up in one of those things." It's up to us to embrace this, to recognize that, hey, this is who we truly are within us. And as we begin to recognize this and identify it, we begin to make our true selves. And I intentionally like to use that word make, and will again and again, in light of the way the police use the term. When they make your car, if a policeman pulls you over and makes your car, he doesn't manufacture your car. He makes it, he identifies what it is. And this is what the Tibetans and other traditions tell us about the light body, is it's not something we manufacture, it's something we already are. We have to identify it within ourselves and identify the symbolism. So as we continue this journey, I want to take you back to 1996, when my journey, Starwalker journey, actually really began, although I didn't know it. I had written a book called The Peacemaker and the Key of Life. It's my first book. And it was about a reincarnating figure that is called the Peacemaker, and a collection of power tools that are secreted away at various times and then reassembled. It really began with this image. I saw it in a Joseph Campbell book. It shows Jesus with a rod or wand in his hand, which is the equivalent to the Tibetan Vajra. And he's tapping Lazarus on the third eye. He's literally shown here raising Lazarus from the dead. Now, something we need to know is that in the esoteric version of this story, Lazarus isn't technically dead, deceased, as in being a deceased person. He's not alive and awake. He's, we call it a zombie, right? And he lacks, according to the New Testament, the glory of God. Jesus says, "I'll fix that." And he takes his Vajra out, his wand, and hits Lazarus on his crown chakra. Now he's ringing or singing like a bell. Okay? He's awakened his crown chakra. And I remember looking at this the first time and thinking, that looks almost exactly like the way the ancient Egyptians would portray Thoth or Tahuti, their god of divine magic or alchemy, raising King Seti from the dead. King Seti is dressed as Osiris, and you note the phonetic similarity between the name Lazarus and Osiris. They're almost the same name. Both figures are raised from an earthly plane to a higher plane. And here we see Thoth with the key of life, once again, tipped with that oil, and he's raising Seti, just like Jesus raised Lazarus. So I'm out here in writing this book. I've written this book, The Peacemaker and the Key of Life, and I'm invited to what's called Sitchin Study Days in Denver, Colorado. Major conference dedicated to the work of Zecharia Sitchin, who had written incredible books about the Anunnaki and otherworldly civilization coming here and advancing or accelerating human evolution. And after my talk, the woman in the photo I just showed you a moment ago came up to me and invited me to a person's home. She said, I work for Dr. Charles Muses. Do you know who he is? And I had no idea. And she said, well, he's an Egyptologist and a mathematician. And he's not in town, but he wants to invite you to his home tonight to experience the Temple of Isis that he's built in his home. And so my friends and I decided to go out there to his home. It's called Falcon Wing. And we go into this Temple of Isis. It's got this really powerful, powerful energy. And I'm really enjoying it. But there's a box of books over there in the corner that I keep my eye on. And finally, the woman says, go ahead, hit the box of books. I was like a dog, and someone's got some treats over there, and couldn't wait to get in that box of books. And it was Dr. Muse's books that he had left for me. And as I start perusing the pages of this books, I realize that what he is showing is like not just a pathway forward for me, but certainly for all of us. He wrote in one of his books that the ancient Egyptians believed that the soul of the deceased came to reside in the heavens as a star. And if the soul passed all the tests that it would encounter in the Duat or the Nether world, then it would become one with Osiris or Sokar, the Egyptian god of resurrection, and forever live in the night sky as a bright star. So he's enfolding the ancient Egyptian star-walking belief that all of us are made of star stuff. We have this indestructible seed atom, this drop within us, and we ultimately can become a star. And in fact, the ancient Egyptians specifically pointed us towards the three belt stars of Orion as a star nursery and also as a star gateway to the center of the Milky Way galaxy, where along the way we would encounter other ascended or resurrected beings. Now, here's the real thing that I really locked onto with Dr. Muse's work. He said that the ancient Egyptians, especially their god Ptah, who they said came from Sirius, had developed a technology in which tones, lights, and an as yet unidentified plant were used to open a rusty valve or trigger the production of large pulses of hormones similar to the X-dysone produced by larval forms of insects, which allows the adult form to emerge. And in this way, he said, they would allow the gestation or mutation of a non-molecular body, a new skin, a duplicate version of ourselves that would allow the survival of consciousness beyond physical death. Now, think about that in light of what I just said about the Pleiadian priestesses. Dissolving their body into its primordial or divine essence, beaming themselves to another world, then phasing back into a physical flesh and blood body. They are saying exactly the same thing. And now Dr. Muses is pointing us to a technology that was used to do this star walking. Tones, lights, and plants. Well, we just talked about an oil, a psychoactive oil, hallucinogenic oil that was also made from plants. Probably these same plants that were brought from other worlds. I mean, it's astonishing to read the academic papers about various plants, including frankincense, myrrh, cannabis, psilocybin mushrooms, amanita mushrooms, that came from other worlds and were imported to Earth. And the academics have no argument with this. What they argue about is which star systems they come from, and how, for example, did the psilocybin mushroom, the psychoactive psilocybin mushroom, arrive on Earth? Was it brought, or was it put on a meteorite? They really split hairs about this, but the point is that they're talking about these psychoactive substances, plants, that awaken our consciousness and, as Dr. Muses is saying here, can be used ultimately to transmute our body into light. Now, don't worry, that's not what we're going to be doing here today. We're not going to turn you into some goo or goo made of light, but this is at the apex of this teaching. And as we strive for the apex of this teaching, what we're ultimately starting to do is draw down the original nature of these star walkers and ultimately to incorporate them in our lives incrementally. Dr. Muses wrote that the principal agent of Osiris's transformation, in other words, his raising from mortal to the immortal state, was a divine food, which, like some super royal jelly could do for bees, would stimulate metamorphic neurosecretory organs in the human central nervous system and enable a superbiological process to take place to mature a higher body that can transcend at death and is capable of furnishing a sensorium to perceive and function in a world freer than the transient three-dimensional one in which we are currently confined. This, he said, is the ageless promise that ancient Egypt held forth most explicitly. This is the original teaching brought to earth by the Starwalkers. This divine food, the tones, the lights that all go with it, that go to creating essentially a duplicate of ourselves, a clone of ourselves, a light body clone of ourselves into which our consciousness can be deposited. We can be projected to other star systems. Now, one reason that we want to pay attention to this today and why this is so important is because Silicon Valley is proposing an alternative way for us to do this. They are proposing that we upload our consciousness into cartoon avatar versions of ourselves, that we live in a simulated reality in a new body that's in a new reality that is so much better than this one, we won't want to come back to this one. And so this is literally starting to present a choice to humanity at this time. How will you ultimately attain your ascension body or your light body? Are you going to follow the organic path, pursuing the search for the tones, lights, and plants and other worldly beings that can assist us? Or are you going to follow the transhumanist AI path and upload your consciousness into a cartoon avatar and live forever inside a black box? This literally is a choice that we're going to be confronted with in the next few years. So this is why it's imperative for us to contact the ancestors who originally possessed this teaching and can assist in our own transformation. And again, I'm not suggesting that we all want to set as our immediate goal our transfiguration into light. However, as we go along this path and begin to upgrade ourselves because we're on that path, this is where the process of a transformation for each of us begins to accelerate, and where the process of global transformation begins to be a possibility as well. Dr. Musa continues saying, all this brings us to a key point in ancient Egyptian ethnobotany. Ingestion of the sacred material was designed not to merely give a high, it most certainly was psychoactive and hallucinogenic, but to trigger and impel the metamorphic process leading to a theurgic transmutation of human nature into apotheosis. Okay, these are a lot of big words, but they're really simple ultimately, because what they're really talking about is us healing ourselves and healing our world by connecting to our original divine nature, linking with these beings and ultimately opening up our consciousness through the ingestion of sacred materials that were designed to accelerate this metamorphic process. What we're looking at here is actually an image from King Tut's shrines, one of the sleeves that contained his sarcophagus. And this is the first image that we ever see using the uroboros, the serpent biting its own tail, which is the symbol for the divine work. That's what that word theurgy means, the divine work. Theurgy, apotheosis, metamorphic transfiguration. This is the business of the Starwalkers, if you will. This is the original, I don't want to use the word religion, I prefer to use sacred tradition on earth that is traced to the divine feminine. And one reason that we haven't seen the promulgation of this teaching in mass on earth is because it has been suppressed traditionally by patriarchal religions and patriarchal forces. But it originates with the divine feminine, and we're starting to see a resurgence in that understanding of the divine feminine in our time. And this is why we're also starting to see now an incredible resurgence in the use of hallucinogens and psychedelics, which we'll talk about here in a moment. So what the Egyptians were trying to, in part, get us to remember is our true nature and our connection to other worlds, other worldly beings, star walkers, and that we are all ultimately agents of our Creator. In states of great love, said Muses, and inspiration, a window opens within and a light from a higher reality shines in. This is our ultimate question right now, is how are we going to allow that higher light, that divine light, to shine in? How do we open a window? And the path that I've been pursuing and will continue to pursue is involving the use of psychedelics, hallucinogens, sacred materials, sacred plants such as this, that were imported here by the Starwalkers and were brought here specifically to assist and accelerate our transformation. You don't have to rely solely on psychedelics and hallucinogens to do this, though. Meditation, breath work are other modalities. What I'm suggesting to you is that all of these modalities are here for us at this time because this is the most important healing that we need. We've got to be able to open this window, as Dr. Muses described it, and find this divine food, this plant that opens the valve, the window, that leaves us in complete control. And this is something that's very important. I mean, can you imagine a substance, a sacred substance, a food, where you can go into a ceremony or a sacred gathering with yourself or even like-minded others and ingest a food that opens your heart, opens this window into the divine realm, but yet leaves you in complete control? We are in a time now where that quote-unquote technology is reemerging, where people are gathering around the world, doing the breath work, doing the meditation, having these sacred ceremonies, and the impact as this accelerates is going to be profound in our world. Monday night I'll be giving a talk on the psychedelic sacrament, and what we're starting to see is a legalization process of like MDMA, that opens the heart and is a psychedelic that opens up our consciousness and enables almost instant healing from trauma and pain. Psilocybin, same thing. We're seeing these substances now descheduled in countries like Australia. America, excuse me, is next. And what is going to happen is we're going to have a tsunami of higher consciousness that is going to be washing over this planet as a consequence of this legalization. And again, it's not just the psychedelics that are going to cause this. It's again, the millions of people around the world for the first time in history that are doing yoga, that are doing breath work, that are doing the meditation work. Joe Dispenza comes to mind. Movements all around the planet where people are tapping into these aspects of themselves. And it's not all just about healing our physical body, healing old pain and trauma, releasing ourselves from that. It's about healing our world, but ultimately connecting it with these other and higher dimensional civilizations that we're speaking of. That's the real disclosure that I think is now being hinted at, especially by the U.S. government, some in the U.S. government. We have known for over 70 years that the U.S. government has possession of hardware spacecraft. We're aware that the victims or pilots of that craft were recovered. They're now referred to as non-biological entities in the halls of the U.S. Congress and Senate. But they're also now being told, and they're not even prepared for this, that we actually have to be prepared for the interdimensional hypothesis, that these aren't just flesh and blood beings any longer that we're dealing with, that they're another category of beings. Those interdimensionals, I think, are the Starwalkers. They're the ones that the ancient Egyptians knew of, the Sumerians and others. They're coming back into our world now because this is such a powerful and profound time of transformation. As we look at this image from, once again, Tutankhamun's tomb, or rather his shrine, Dr. Muses observed that the three rays that we see descending from the star in the upper left represent star power energy entering the forehead of Tutankhamun, and who's in his pupil form. He's in a pupil form like a butterfly. He's in a transitional phase here. And as the light is entering his third eye, he's beginning this process of transfiguration or transmutation. And what happens is that this light from Sirius opens up that rusty valve within. He's opened the window, probably using blue lotus oil, which was known as a narcotic and a psychoactive substance that the Egyptians used to open their consciousness. And what Muses observed is that in Egypt, the etheric or quintessence was represented in the form of a five-pointed star, which we see in the upper left. Next to it, we see, or above the ba bird next to Tutankhamun, we see the 2 feet walking. That indicates the Egyptian word Saba, or star, or door. And what Muses proposes, this represents Tutankhamun walking through a star door. He's going through a star gate, and he, in fact, is a star walker. And this starts to put us, once again, more firmly on that path of the awakening of the light body, the body of light that is referred to in every spiritual tradition by various names, always talking about it as the divine aspect of our body, the body of glory, the spirit body, the luciform body, the radiant body, the sidereal body, or the celestial body are all interchangeable terms for this aspect of ourselves that can be awakened through the breath work, through the activation of our neurosecretory system. It begins this process of unfolding it from within. And then we put on this glorious robe of light, similar to the cloak of stars that the Mother Mary wears, or we see Kuan Yin wearing a similar robe riding upon her cloud. During a dream, Jacob saw a ladder reaching into the heavens. There were angels of God that were ascending and descending on it, and Jacob awoke and called this the gate of heaven. Well, we now know from our esoteric studies that Jacob might well have laid his head on a particular stone in Jerusalem, probably at a place called Luz or Light, or it's an awakening of his consciousness. The stone is the philosopher's stone. The stone is the pineal gland, that magnificent gland in the center of our brain, about the size of a pea, covered with quartz crystal, that once it gets to shaking and baking, it can release neurochemicals, hormones, that put you to sleep, alter your consciousness, that put you in elevated states of joy, all the way up to the manufacture and secretion of dimethyltryptamine, which opens up our consciousness into parallel realities, hallucinogenic molecule found in ayahuasca and other ceremonial plants. This is what the ancients knew, and they were recognizing the power of our consciousness to awaken. And once we open that window, we're then able to scale that ladder where we meet the other Starwalkers that are coming and going. They're all around us at all times. They're looking for us just as we are looking for them. And you can make first contact with these beings by all of the modalities that we've been discussing here today. And I'm encouraging you to set that as one of your intentions, to connect with these beings and ultimately fulfill your soul's destiny. That's what this is really all about. This is a path that Jacob went on that could heal the physical body, can heal physical pain, put us into elevated states of joy that some of us can't even imagine yet, but we can experience under certain circumstances, and ultimately opening that gateway of the sun into other worlds. And that's something that I think is worth noting here. If you've never thought of the sun as a portal or gateway into other realms, when you leave the conference today, or perhaps when you wake in the morning and look to the east and see the sunrise, think of it as literally a gateway to heaven. We talk about the sun, the S-O-N, as the gate to heaven, but the S-U-N is also that gate as well, that can instantly connect us with other worlds. At all times and in every age, there have been souls whose inner light, having been fanned by the flames of the other world, awaken and begin the journey home. And in this age, there are many of us. I wrote that in 2008 in my book, Starwalkers and the Dimension of the Blessed. And this is when I really got onto the Starwalker path and took a few tentative steps on it. And now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm starting to circle back to this work, thanks to the intervention, if you will, of the mermaid that we spoke about. And the cover of this book was done by a friend of mine named Dana Augustine. It shows an initiate walking between two pillars. And it was an image that was actually drawn from the Temple of Isis at Philae, where at a place called Hadrian's Gate, we see two pillars side by side. On the left, we see what I call the Osiris device, the ancient Egyptian resurrection machine that is very easily identified as some kind of a Tesla device by some today. And on the right side is the Tet pillar, the resurrection pillar. This is the ultimate gateway symbolism in ancient Egypt. It's something that I really enjoy following around. But the fact of the matter is that this gateway symbolism isn't just found in the Egyptian tradition. This is the second oldest human story, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is a Sumerian king, 1500 BC, 2200 BC. He's told by a goddess, Inanna, that he's 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. And if he wants to make it through the gate of the gods, he's got to clean up his act. He's got to become not just 2/3 divine, but whole, holy, complete, fully divine. And he's informed about a plant that can assist him in his quest for immortality. And now we're talking about what kind of plant here, right? It's a plant that grew at the bottom of the sea, and Gilgamesh retrieves this, but he ultimately loses it to a serpent. And this is symbolic of humanity's denial of ultimately the secrets of immortality. But obviously the Egyptians, in their quest for the sacred plant in tones and lights, were also aware of this. In this image, we see Gilgamesh having scaled several stairs. And note the musical term, he scaled the ladder here, and he's standing in between two ringing posts. We see squiggly lines that symbolize water, frequency, or vibration, perhaps. Take your pick. And he's being assisted by two gods that are holding up ring posts. These are, they're called janitors. And I think this is actually the first use of the word janitor, and I think they were called janitors because if Gilgamesh goes through the gate and he's not pure of heart, it's going to be like walking into a blender. He's going to get his feathers ruffled, and there's going to be a big mess. And so the janitors are here to clean up that mess. And they're present in numerous examples of these gateway type scenarios. The Epic of Gilgamesh says that straight is the crossing point, the gateway. The actual Sumerian word is Nibiru. Nibiru is not a planet, as Sitchin had originally proposed. It's actually a word that means the crossing place or the gateway. And so here in the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's being directly referenced as the crossing point, the gateway, the Nibiru. And straight is the crossing point, and narrow is the way that leads to it. So this is the Epic of Gilgamesh. Then we get a statement directly from Jesus who said, "Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." Jesus must have read the Epic of Gilgamesh, or whoever wrote this passage in Matthew had to have written the Epic of Gilgamesh. They're either directly quoting it or they plagiarized it. It's the exact same statement, and my point is that over a course of 2,000 years or so before the time of Jesus, they're still talking about this, and now 2,000 years later, you and I are still talking about this. How do we get through that narrow gate? How do we find that gate? What do we need to do to open our consciousness to be able to perceive that gate? And ultimately, if we decide to walk through it. This is a photo I took in St. Paul's Cathedral in London, where we see it's the identical imagery. Jesus is now returning through that gate. He's standing on the stairs just like Gilgamesh. We don't have janitors on either side of the gate. We have angels. But it's the same concept that we're emerging from or entering through a gateway, and showing that this star walking teaching has been ever present in artwork and in literature, especially sacred literature, for 5,000 years. And it's now time for us to really begin to assemble it in an open-hearted, open-minded manner. As a star walker, and that's what I believe the Gnostic text described Jesus as, a star-walking time traveler. He sought to bring us knowledge of transforming ourselves into a refined light, starlight, so that we could be resurrected as stars. And as I've said, this is our ultimate quest. It seems like a lot to handle on a Sunday afternoon, but that is the potential within us. In doing so, return the soul to life, to walk across the river of life, the Milky Way, and to exit it into other dimensions. Jesus specifically referenced this in the Pistis Sophia when he said, "Cease not to seek day and night, and remit not yourselves until you find the purifying mysteries, which will purify you and make you into a refined light, so that you will go on high and inherit the light of my kingdom." He's talking about the tones, lights, and plants. His wife, Mary Magdalene, was a miraphor, a master of these psychoactive oils and substances that could awaken our consciousness and even produce the resurrection body of Christ. This is a lineage that we're referencing here that goes back before the Sumerians. It comes from the stars, but it runs through all the world's sacred spiritual traditions, but has previously gone mostly undetected by most people. Jesus, of course, as well as Mary Magdalene, were Essenes, a primarily Jewish mystical group that had heavy Buddhist influences. They were founded in Alexandria, Egypt in the 3rd century BC. And in their text, they tell of a group of godlike people known as the perfect light humans, who lived alongside yet separate from humans. They were distinguished by a sheath or a cloak that they wore. It made them luminous. It made them radiant and gave them extraordinary powers that were called she powers that include levitation and invisibility. These are natural human abilities, we're told. It's symbolized by a white linen robe, which is what we see this figure wearing in this beautiful image that was from Herculaneum in Rome from the 2nd century BC, but was ultimately reflecting or describing a Nile water ceremony that took place in Alexandria, Egypt, among priests and priestesses of Isis and Serapis. And it focused on the living waters that would awaken our consciousness and heal our physical body. The living waters are a reference ultimately to those secretions we spoke of a moment ago of the pineal gland, of those molecules that, again, put us to sleep, put us in elevated states of joy and bliss, and ultimately can open gateways within our consciousness. You don't have to have a plant to do this, is the thing. These are endogenously produced molecules within our own neurosecretory system. So if your preference is to have an ayahuasca ceremony or to smoke DMT in the form of changa, that's one direct way to do it, but you can also produce it from within your own pineal gland and neurosecretory system. And this is something that's very important to acknowledge. This is what people are doing with breath work, what they're doing with meditation today. This is becoming not a common thing yet, but it will be. This is part of the transformation that is undergoing right now. And as I mentioned previously, the heavy lifting has been done right now by people like Joe Dispenza and the thousands of people around the world that are learning about their powers of the pineal gland and activating the neurosecretory system. The legalization of MDMA, the legalization of psilocybin is all part of and enfolded within the same movement to produce this awakening in our consciousness and ultimately the healing of all this trauma that has undergone on the planet. The Essenes told us that they had called in a high celestial being. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, they tell us they called in this high celestial being, and there were a group of priestesses, including the Virgin Mary, who had specifically and specially prepared their bodies to hold this divine essence or being. Now, what we're told is that in the virgin birth, the Virgin Mary produced a one-off type of a being. But as I said previously, there's a lineage of these priestesses who came from the Pleiades and brought this teaching to earth, and the Virgin Mary is part of this lineage. And I'm not saying Christ came from the Pleiades, but I am saying that the Dead Sea Scrolls will tell you that the Essenes intentionally called in this high celestial being, Yeshua would have been his name, and that there were priestesses who had prepared themselves, cultivated their bodies specifically for this purpose. And according to the community rule, which was the raison d'etre, the constitution, if you will, of the Essene order, they tell us that the purpose of calling in this Starwalker Jesus, was to bring about a healing, great peace and a long life and fruitfulness, together with every everlasting blessing and eternal joy in life without end, a crown of glory and a garment of majesty and unending light. That's what the Starwalker ethos is ultimately all about, is how do we elevate this joy within ourselves? How do we bring the end of trauma to the earth and bring in this elevated joy and bliss? How do we activate that crown and get that garment of majesty and unending light? This is what is being transmitted here in these coronation scenes, where we see Jesus with either the Mother Mary or Mary Magdalene, his wife and chief apostle, where he's literally activating her crown, and they both already have on the star cloak, the robe of unending light. This is literally an open-eye meditation, according to the creators of artwork like this, that we are to visualize. We are in the presence of that Christ being who is now reaching out and activating our own consciousness, enhancing our own consciousness. And we, too, are revealing our true nature. This robe of unending light isn't something you're going to go get at Nordstrom or Saks or Dillard's. It's something that's already within you. It's awaiting revelation. It's awaiting the lifting of the veil. And the veil is, of course, over our consciousness, and the veil is the material flesh and blood that conceals our true divine nature. The Gnostic texts are also based on this idea, and the beliefs of the Essenes, who believe that in order to enter the purer celestial realms, and indeed to interact with the Starwalkers, one is required to become like the angels who dress lightly in a white sheath or robe of glory. Attaining this robe of glory or sheath of light, again symbolized by wearing the white linen, required a restoration, a transformation, or the word the Essenes would use, a perfection of our being from earthly flesh to celestial flesh. And the Essenes were spiritual scientists who were experts in attaining this. This is what is at the core of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and this is what figures like the Gnostics and then later the Cathars also embodied this exact same teaching. In the book of Revelation, John the Revelator espouses Essene belief. The book of Revelation was written by an Essene, John, for Essenes, and it's loaded with a specific Essene symbolism because they are the originators of the New Jerusalem concept. It says that blessed are those who wash their robes so that they will have the right to the tree of life and may enter. And the question then becomes, well, how do we wash our robes of light? And the answer is tones, lights, and plants. The very same tones, lights, and plants that are used to produce the non-molecular light body are used to cleanse it. And this is, again, as I'm suggesting to you, this is where my work is now leading, is into what is that exact process? Do you know that in the 1930s, less than 10% of the American population brushed their teeth? Less than 10% of the people brushed their teeth. Then a man came along and invented Pepsodent toothpaste and started a marketing campaign and started teaching Americans we need a new daily ritual. We're going to start brushing our teeth. Within a decade, his company was worth over $1 billion, and over 60% of the American people started brushing their teeth as a daily ritual. It was only 100 years before that we really started using soap on a daily basis. So my vision, my idea here, and what I'm asking you to think about is just imagine a world where what you and I think about, and maybe somewhat tentatively are identifying with the light body, thinking about it. We might be doing meditation, we might be doing yoga, we might be doing whatever modality we prefer to awaken that light body. Imagine a civilization, a new America, a new world, where over 60% of the people are on the same path as you are. What would that world be like? And how can we manifest that? Where imagine you go into the CVS and here's a new kit for washing your robe of light, you know? Or there's a whole aisle in the grocery store of foods and substances that you can embody. Maybe it's a amanita mushroom, maybe it's this meditation, maybe it's another plant, maybe it's something else that now all of a sudden there's a whole aisle devoted to light body, right? And that's a different world. But that is the world that I think we're on the cusp of right now. And we are the ones that are advocating that. We're showing that way. And it's going to be, again, like the 1930s where people go, well, what do you mean you brush your teeth? You know, it's now people are like, what do you mean there's a light body? We have to educate the world about this. We have to talk with our friends and loved ones about our true divine nature and what this Starwalker lineage ultimately references. And then we need to, find the tools and techniques. Is it the oils that the Essenes were using to do this? Can we duplicate those oils? Yes, we can. Those recipes are available in the text. They left them for us. We know the cannabis oil that Moses was using. We know the cannabis oil that King David was using. We have the chemistry now. We've gone to the sites. We have found it. We can duplicate it. It's just that it's been suppressed. But now we can bring it back into our world with a much higher intention, and we can become like Mary washing that robe. And once we do this, this is going to open up a world of incredible new possibilities to us and a greater unfolding and awareness of the majesty of the ancients. For example, we're looking here at a statue of the goddess Ishtar or Mari, 2300 BC. She is the daughter of Enki, one of the Anunnaki scientists, spiritual scientists. She's going to make a journey into the underworld. It's the world's oldest human story. And we're told that as she journeys into the underworld, she had accumulated 7 divine objects, including an ointment that she put on her eyes that awakened her vision or opened up her vision. And that by reclaiming these objects, we can follow her path and ultimately journey ourselves into the underworld. And she might well be one of the figures that we meet along the way. The ointment on her eyes, her Shagura helmet of salvation, her rainbow necklace of immortality, her elixir of life, her rings of gold, and her miracle garment all set her apart as a Starwalker or identify her as a Starwalker. And in fact, she's attired exactly the same way as Mary in the descriptions from the Essene text. It's a lineage, it's a continuation, and you and I are the ones who are now going to be taking this forward. And that's what makes this time tremendously exciting because, as I mentioned previously, not only do we have what's going on in the disclosure movement, what's going on with AI and transhumanism, we also have the light body movement and the potential for all of us to awaken our consciousness as Starwalkers. If you come to Egypt with me, I'll take you to the Temple of Luxor, and we'll see this beautiful depiction of Amenhotep III, the father of Akhenaten, kneeling before Amun, and with with Ra behind him. And you look at an image such as this, and you can easily identify what's happening. It's a transmission from a higher celestial being to a mortal human, awakening his consciousness and transforming him. This is an image that is just transfixing when you stand before it because you recognize that this is actually happening to you as you're looking at the image. We know this from the neurosciences, that as you see this image, a part of you is imagining that this awakening is happening to you. And what we need to do is find the tones, lights, and plants that will help us to more fully awaken our consciousness as is happening here. Undoubtedly, it's the pineal gland that is being activated in these images, just as we saw with Mary and Jesus just a moment ago. The ancients undoubtedly knew the power of the pineal gland, as the seat of the soul, as the bridge between the dimensions, between the physical and the metaphysical. And they also knew that our pineal gland and our whole neurosecretory system secretes endogenous psychedelics. It just is. And we have been deprived of access to these molecules for a very long time. But now this is what is changing in our world. We're starting to gain awareness of it, and we're recognizing the sacredness of these substances. And it's not just for entertainment or getting a high, it's for a very specific purpose to link us with these celestial beings that can complete our transformation. And I'm really thrilled to see the movement that is happening in our world now to integrate with these higher celestial beings. And many people are utilizing meditation and the modalities we've been describing, ayahuasca, MDMA, psilocybin, other ways to open up these pathways. And I for one, embrace it because it's like this, as someone expressed it to me. It's like, you can spend years and years and years meditating in a cave and following this path, or you can take the Concorde. The Concorde is available to us today in terms of the breath work techniques and the psychedelic ceremonies that are now available. Do you know that there's over 1,000 ayahuasca medicine leaders or providers in America today? Over 1,000. 10 years ago, there was probably a handful. Another year or two from now, there could be many, many thousands more. This is something that is indicative of the transformation that is happening in our world right now. And it's very important for us to educate ourselves about this, to find out what path really am I resonating with, and where ultimately can I take this, and beginning to visualize ourselves as that whole, wholly complete, and indeed healed person, and connecting with the Starwalkers. And again, this is, as I've been saying, where everything that I will be doing from now on will be relative to these kinds of ideas. I remember very well in 2002 when this photo was released of the pineal gland, showing it covered with quartz crystals. It literally is the foundation stone within us, the stone of the philosophers that can release these secretions, release these hormones, release these molecules that awaken that divine self within us, and ultimately, as Dr. Muses is saying, can dissolve the body into light. There is a technology available to do this, and it's something that we can recover, and indeed are recovering in our world today. The wonders before us are beyond our comprehension. I mean, we are literally in a time now where we were going to be able to identify these beings, connect with them, and have our divinity within us activated through these interactions with them, just as Mary Magdalene did via Jesus. So when we come back to that original photo that I showed earlier of Jesus with the vajra, or the wand in hand, raising Lazarus from the dead, we now have a really clear picture of what is transpiring here. is that he's literally activating the pineal gland, that wondrous manufacturing plant of these sacred oils and secretions that can open pathways and gateways in our consciousness and ultimately heal our body, put us into states of true divine joy and happiness, bliss, but ultimately dissolve the body into light. When people think of Starwalkers, they also think of star brothers and star sisters. When we see the robe of light of the Starwalkers, they, in many instances, have these squiggly lines that indicate frequency, water, or vibration. And that's what I believe is being shown here. This is a Starwalker in his frequency or his energy body. I'm now comparing the Starwalker at Rock Art Ranch to Shamash, the sun god, in the Sumerian and Babylonian tradition, who's sitting before an object that's referred to as the spade of Marduk. And when we look in the detail of the image, we see very clearly the squiggly lines indicating frequency, vibration. And he's wearing a cloak, an energy cloak of some kind, again, standing or sitting before, rather, the spade of Marduk, which is what the arrow is pointing to. It means bright and shining, this spade. So here in the detail, you see the squiggly lines, and now I'm comparing what he's sitting in front of, the spade, to another object, which I'm going to identify here in just a moment. This imagery extends into the image of Shamash. This is considered to be the Anunnaki sun god. He's got his horned or rayed headdress on as he's sitting on his throne, very clearly to me wearing the same sort of cloak. And we see the same type of imagery in the transfiguration images of Jesus, where we see waves of frequency or light emanating from his body. And that's what this cloak is called, the malamu, by the Sumerians. It means divine radiance. It means luminosity. It means super strength or superpower, super strength, sort of like Superman's cape kind of a thing. And it's transmittable. The Anunnaki brought the malamu cloak to Earth. They transmitted it to humans, and it can be passed along from human to human through this teaching. It turns up in the Egyptian tradition, where now we see Selket standing or guarding one of the shrines of Tutankhamun. And when we come into the detail on the shrine, we see the goddess Isis is wearing a cloak or a garment with the same lines, the same energy or frequency pattern being portrayed. This is the malamu, the radiant cloak of the Anunnaki, weaving its way into the Egyptian tradition. And here in the detail now you see the frequency. This is one of the tip-offs of the Starwalkers, is they wear this cloak or garment of light. And in artwork, it is portrayed as luminous, radiant, giving the ability to become invisible, to manipulate mind over matter, to walk through walls, to perform miracles. And the idea from all of these star-walking traditions is that garment of light is within us. We just need to learn to wash it. We need to learn to make it, to identify it, to weave it through acts of love and kindness, and ultimately to exemplify it, to wear it on the outside instead of on the inside. Very nearby at Rock Art Ranch, we see this figure here, this what they describe as a shaman wearing a horned or rayed headdress, seemingly standing next to some kind of an object, which is similar to a virtually identical figure at McKee Springs in Utah. So now we're up in Utah, about 500 miles away from Rock Art Ranch, but yet we see the same imagery. It's the exact same. Thank you. I'm going to be just 2 minutes as we wrap up here. Now at McKee Ranch or McKee Springs in Vernal, Utah, near Skinwalker Ranch, we see another horned or rayed figure standing next to a portal, and we see the same object that is portrayed. And we wonder, well, what is that object? And when I first looked at this image last year, I started to get involved with the Skinwalker Ranch show and the phenomena up there at Skinwalker Ranch, which is a paranormal hotspot. I looked at that and thought, well, I know what that is. That is exactly the same as the spade of Marduk, the bright and shining spade of Marduk that the Anunnaki Starwalkers would use. It's symbolically the same as the Osiris device in ancient Egypt. Isis is tending a device that could dissolve the physical flesh and blood body into light and project the luminous light body into the dimension of the blessed. I'll never forget being here in Los Angeles in 1999, and a mycologist, mushroom expert's in my audience, and he's saying, William, when are you going to wake up and realize that the Osiris device, what you're calling a resurrection device, is a psilocybin mushroom? They even describe it as mushroom-shaped, and I spent the next 20 years thinking, that's ridiculous, right? And then all of a sudden I start to get into the study of the psilocybin mushroom and its symbolism and realize that is what we're looking at here. And this is Alex Gray, a great artist and advocate of use of psychedelics, pointing to this exact image at McKee Springs and saying that the shamanistic figure with the horns or rays is literally standing next to a psilocybin mushroom. What if that is the key tool to awakening the light body? What if it is the key tool to washing the robe of light? What if it is a key to the star walking that we're talking about here? I believe it is, and in following in the work of Terence McKenna, who said that this is the key to transdimensional time travel or transdimensional travel. So remember the light being in the portal at the center of your being, and join me as we connect with the Starwalkers among us. So thank you all very much.